Final Fantasy XIV is like the 25th game in the Final Fantasy series. It depends on how you count. And on August 12th, 2020, a day after it released patch 5.3, it made me cry. Wait, let's try the opener again. Shadowbringers is a critically acclaimed expansion to Final Fantasy XIV. In it, you travel to an alternate dimension of Eorzea, which was created after two crystals got angry and into a slap fight. But now the land is destroyed by light thanks to these guys. The most impactful and emotionally resonant villains in Final Fantasy history? No, that can't be right. In the latest expansion of Final Fantasy XIV, you are often tasked with doing menial labor, such as going to a place and talking to a person or killing X amount of mobs, in a story that Kotaku calls triumphant, the artistry inspiring. Okay, what is going on here? How can a story that's filled with so much metaphysical nonsense be so engaging as to be profound? How can a story that seems to ape so many overworn tropes be so emotionally resonant? And how can a group of villains who look like this possibly be in any way good? Nobody who dresses in an all-black hooded robe could possibly be an engaging villain. That's just the law, isn't it? So, Final Fantasy XIV was first published in 2010 and then was rebooted completely in 2013, and since then has had 3 major expansions. I don't want to spend 52 minutes explaining every bit of minutia, so I'll be paraphrasing a good deal of the story. If you find any errors in this section, feel free to leave a complaint in the comment section, thereby increasing my viewer count, you fool! Honestly, I'm not even going to try to explain 1.0 because I've never played it and neither did anyone else. The only thing you need to know is that a moon fell, and the moon is actually a dragon and it crashed the server. None of 1.0 is even playable anymore, so you start with Final Fantasy XIV, a realm reborn. You create a character, choosing your starting class and moon sign and gender and race, but if we're being completely honest, you're gonna be a cat girl. Or, if you already bought Shadowbringers, a bunny girl. Most of the game takes place on the continent of Eorzea, a land with 5 major city-states, although you can only start in 3 of them. The Tree Huggers, the Pirates, or the Capitalists. They're all living happy until the evil empire required in every JRPG by law, I think it was part of the Treaty of San Francisco, invaded, taking over one of the city-states called Alamigo. They wanted to take over the rest of the city-states so that they could destroy things called primals. Primals in Final Fantasy XIV are what happens when you get a bunch of magical energies together, usually in the form of crystals or blood, and then you pray to it, the collective will coalescing in the form of the god that they're praying to. Not like the actual god, but the image of it, who then mind controls their followers and sucks life energy from the planet. The Guardians, the evil empire I mentioned before, believe Eorzea has a primal problem, and wants to help them with that, whether they want help or not. Now, this whole thing is being egged on by a mysterious group of super mages called Ascians, who fucking suck and are lame. So you start in one of the 3 cities from before and do a bunch of boring adventure quests looking at all the pretty scenery from the Dragon Moon Calamity from years earlier. It's called the 7th Umbral Era, which refers to a cycle of build-up and rapid decline that has happened to civilization across history. This is actually really important, but it's really dumb. Eventually you're introduced to the Scions of the 7th Dawn, who have the goal to do something I think quite primals, but they're really bad at it and they make you do all the work. Well, mostly you do all the work because a crystal called Heidelin gave you the power to not be mind controlled by primals, and also gave you the power to see backstory vision, and sometimes you have super strength or whatever. The Empire has plans to defeat Eorzea. They recreated an ancient mecha called Ultima, which can suck the power from primals to make themselves stronger. All along they're helped by Laha Breya, an Ascian who went to Bad Guy University and got his masters in cliché. You defeat the Empire, you defeat the mech, and then you defeat the Ascian in the longest dungeon of all time. You free the land, and the 7th Astral Era is declared, and you are called a Warrior of Light. And then, in some quests before the first expansion, you help a teenager create his own private army from unrepentant criminals, which works out just fucking swell. In an incredibly long cutscene that involves dismemberment, assassination, and betrayal, the Scions are forced to flee Eorzea and the alliance of the 3 cities. But don't worry about this, because the writers had no idea what to do with this plot, and they threw threw it away. You flee north to the city-state of Ishgard for the first expansion, Heavensward. Ishgard has been involved in a forever war with a bunch of dragons, which is exactly as badass as it sounds. You venture across the land to figure out what caused the peace to break all those years ago, and why the war has continued for so long, and what shadowy forces have been manipulating the church and its leader. It's the Ascians. It's just always the Ascians. You find out the mystery is that both sides were kinda dicks, but the elves were particularly worse dicks. There's also something about dragon war, it's a little bit weird. You kill the Pope, you kill the Ascians, and you kill the head dragon, which, I mean, killing all the key players is certainly one way to end a war. You bring peace to Ishgard, just in time for a mercenary army your teenage companion created to engineer a war. Although, before that there was this weird interlude with the Warriors of Darkness from an alternate timeline, but that's probably not important. Heavensward is generally well liked for its strong characterization and really cool climactic fights, especially this one. Music is a fucking bop. You see, the leader of the Mercs was actually a hardcore Alamegan revolutionary who wants to stop the Empire from occupying his homeland, so he engineers a battle between the Eorzean Alliance and the Empire at the border wall, using his death to summon a primal and tearing a giant hole in the wall, ensuring that the peace is well and truly broken. The leaders of Eorzea, realizing they have been duped collectively, shrug their shoulders and decide, why not have a war? You go to help free Almega, but run into Xenos Yi Galvis, the crown prince of the Galanina Empire, and the worst villain in the entire game. I will not be taking questions at this time. Next slide. He defeats your resistance and kicks your ass so hard you flee across the sea. The Scions and you figure that splitting the Empire's attention in two by causing an uprising in the distant country of Doma, also under Empire control, will give them a greater chance of success. It's definitely not because the developers got bored of Alamigo halfway through development and decided they really wanted to add samurai. You free Doma, zip back to Alamigo, and free it too, killing Xenos, that dozy fuck, and his pet dragon too. In post-expansion content, the Ascian Elidibris, who had previously shown up a few times to mock you and cause some trouble, possesses the corpse of Xenos to cause yet even more chaos. It's then revealed that the Galanina Empire was created by the Ascians to just fuck the Ascians, fuck their dark god Zodiac, fuck how they ruin every single plot. Here's a quote from a trustworthy source about how much I hated them. Mackenzie felt pure rage-induced disgust that caused Mackenzie to fly into a rant about how bad they were, and how bad the storytelling was every time they showed up on screen. So when I tell you now that I actually love them and I'm seriously considering getting a tattoo of one of their stupid glyphs, you know this is not just me being a weird fanboy about it. My cold, jaded heart was won over by these meddling, black-cloaked walking cliches. As the patch content continued, your friends in the Signs of the Seventh Dawn started getting dizzy and eventually fainting one by one until they were all unconscious. Soon these fainting spells came for you, and you felt called as well by a mysterious source. You do some timey-wimey wibbly-wobbly stuff at a crystal tower and whoosh yourself across dimensions. You wake up in an eerie purple forest that's bathed in an overpowering bright light. A shepherd tells you that the sky has been like that for 100 years or more, and seems resigned to this fate. In short order, you learn that the land is beset by pure white creatures called Sin Eaters, who look like twisted, angelic monsters. You head towards that strangely familiar crystal tower, and on the way you find one of the Sin Eaters, apparently fresh off killing the shepherd you just met. You help them and go to meet he who summoned you, the Crystal Exarch. He had apparently been trying to summon you for 100 years by his time, because he needed your help saving the world, and you're so famous that alternate dimensions cannot hold you back. He lets you in on what the fuck is going on, because at this point I had a lot of questions. So, do you remember that weird interlude of the interdimensional Warriors of Darkness I mentioned briefly? Turns out they were important. I'm very clever. They were previously also Warriors of Light, but really good at it. They were so good at destroying darkness that it altered the balance of the energies in the land, causing light as a concept to flood everything, destroying the entire planet. So good jobs. This flood of light was only stopped when Minfilia. I never explained who Minfilia was, did I? Fuck. Okay, she's like a terrible character whose only job was to get captured 15 times and die off screen. She was nominally the leader of the Signs of the Seventh Dawn, but mostly just pointed you at things to kill. Apparently off screen she didn't just die, she became like a spirit that was also the heart of Hydaelyn, the crystal that gave you the powers from before. Then she stopped the flood of light by doing things. It doesn't matter how because it doesn't make a lot of sense, whatever. Anyways, it stopped the apocalypse, but only sort of. The lands that still exist are infected by light, and the sky has been scorched and bright endlessly for years. And of course, everyone is still constantly assaulted by sin eaters. You find out that your friends have been here for years to them because
time in
the first
is convoluted.
You go to visit two of the scions, the twins Alphanode and Alexey, to learn more about how sin eaters work. Terrifyingly, as it turns out. I learned some more about the city of Yormor and its obese leader Vothri, who serves as a major antagonist throughout the expansion. You also learn about Light Wardens, a really stupid name for mega sin eaters who need to be defeated and the light dispersed to return the land to darkness. When you head back to the Crystal Exarch, you find the area surrounding the Crystal Towers under attack from sin eaters. And it is this dungeon that made me realize that this expansion was going to be different. When you previously went to visit one of your companions, you watched as one of their friends died attempting to save a child, and in the process becomes a sin eater themselves. During this dungeon, in the first boss fight, you fight her. Unless the game might draw attention to this, might have a cutscene, drive your face into tragedy, but here the fight is dumped on you without so much fanfare. An entirely usual and entirely disturbing facet of the world that people need to live with. Horrible, but not worthy of special recognition. Either way, you complete the dungeon and defeat the Light Warden. It's revealed that you alone can destroy them. By taking the light into yourself, you can banish the light from the area and bring back the night. This forms your primary goal for most of the expansion: explore area, kill Light Warden, repeat. As a story conceit, it's barely more complex than collecting MacGuffins and is inherently a bit silly and video gamey. But it gives you the chance to explore this new world and see its troubles and get a sense for the deepest despair that the people have been driven into. As you explore, you meet up with your old comrades. Yoranja is chilling out with some pixies and looking a lot hotter than before. What a glow up. Your Stola is chilling out with some forest cultists and generally being pissed about the whole situation. And Thancred stole an orphan girl from Yormor, who has the power to sense sin eaters named Minfilia? Right, okay, so it's a bit weird, but the real Minfilia, sacrificed herself, and her spirit was kind of reincarnated into a bunch of Minfilias throughout the years who all failed to stop the sin eaters, and this is one of them. Her relationship with Thancred, who was the sworn protector of the real Minfilia, is actually super interesting, but I don't have time to get into it. Eventually she does change her name to Reen, and something taking destiny into your own hands. You also meet up with
I am Emet-Selch, Ascian.
At this point, I think I screamed in frustration. He says now he wants to help you, or at least try to understand you, to find some common ground. For his part, he does actually explain stuff without being insufferably vague, and at one point even saves one of your companions.
There you are.
So at the very least at the start, I didn't completely hate him like I hated the other Ascians. He was forthright, he explained himself, but he was a little bit eccentric. There was something charming in the way he walked and talked. He wasn't trustworthy, but at least he was interesting. At one point after a dungeon, you see an ancient carving on the wall. Emet-Selch tells you that they are the Ascians' backstory, which is convenient. Apparently the Ascians were an ancient race that once had a great calamity, and to avert this calamity, they formed their own primal called Zodiac, who saved them. But there were some people who disagreed with the creation of Zodiac and created a counter-primal, which is coincidentally the crystal that has been your sugar mama since 1.0, which is a little bit awkward since your whole thing is killing primals, but anyway, Mama Crystal and Data Crystal fight. Mama wins and splits Data into 14 pieces with such force it literally tears reality into 14 different dimensions. After this, only 4 beings in the entire multiverse remain unsundered. Heidelin herself, Lahabrea, this guy, he sucks, Emet-Selch, and Elidibus. After revealing this, Emet-Selch tells you his motivation. It's to rejoin the worlds via some magical bullshit, bring their god back to full power, which will allow him to destroy the world as it exists now and bring back the world that he had lost. In terms of motivations, I mean, it's alright, but he does a really good job of selling it. He doesn't seem angry or mad, he just seems really tired. His slow and almost labored way of moving and walking seems less like his eccentricities, but like he's slowed by the weight of the world on his shoulders. So you finish traveling the land and do some fetch quests, you kill the remaining light eaters and have a few heartfelt moments and a few moments that don't really work. You find out that Vothri is actually a light warden because it doesn't matter, but they do explain it, I just don't want to get into it. So you go to confront Vothri in a floating mountain by building a giant golem, and yes, it is dumb as shit. But, I mean, it looks pretty cool, so what are you gonna do? Vothri goes Super Saiyan 3, but you kill him anyways and take the light of the last light warden into yourself, and then you collapse, overcome by all the magical energy. It is killing you, turning you into a sin eater like Tezzaline, just slower, but still inevitable. The Crystal Exec, the mysterious figure that brought you here, tries to steal your power. He lies about wanting it for himself as part of an evil plan, but it's not true. Really, he just idolizes you, because, as it turns out, he's really a minor NPC from an optional 24-man raid tier from 5 years ago. It turns out he's from a possible future, where two worlds are rejoined, but it causes so much destruction in your world that you die, so then he has to use the tower to travel to the past of this other world to bring you here, because you're the only common person in the multiverse and he has a huge crush on you, and if you avert the calamity in this world, then the worlds won't be rejoined and you will survive. Did you get all that? Either way, the plan is dumb, but watch out, Emet-Selch, he has a gun! Okay, so I mean, like, Emet-Selch is canonically one of the 4 most powerful beings in the entire multiverse, but sure, why not use a gun? Either way, he expresses disappointment. He claims he was honestly hoping you would succeed, as it might prove his thesis wrong, that maybe you are worthy of living and capable of remembering his people, so that maybe his journey could finally be at its end. It's not, though. You failed.
What was your true purpose in approaching us? By your 12, boy, have I not told you before that everything I said was the truth? You were specimens by which I might gauge man's potential as it stands. I genuinely had an interest in you, genuinely considered taking you on as allies.
Yet he still doesn't just kill you. He kidnaps the Exarch and bids you come to his home, to Amarat.
When it all becomes too much to bear, seek me out at my abode in the dark depths of the Tempest. There, you may complete your descent into madness with some dignity, far from prying eyes.
You travel to the middle of the ocean to find the ruins of an ancient, magically restored city, far grander than anything you've ever seen. He tells you this was once his home, and takes you through a dungeon so you can see it being destroyed with your own eyes. There's many ways to take this, but given his speeches and the effort, I think he sincerely wants you to be on his side. He wants you to see his point of view, to feel his plight, to remember. You deny him, of course, but he seems so desperate.
Look at me! I have lived 1,000 of your lives. I have broken bread with you, fought with you, grown ill, grown old, sired children, and yes, welcomed death's sweet embrace. For eons have I measured your worth and found you wanting. Too weak and feeble-minded to serve as stewards of any star.
In some of the coolest cutscenes basically ever, the Crystal XX summons an alternate forms of you from the other remaining worlds to help fight him, which you do, and the music fucking bops. Eventually you kill him by combining yourself with Erdbert, your personal force ghost, who I forgot to mention was following you, even though he has scenes that were very emotional. Fuck. MMOs are really big, guys. This video was a mistake. Emmett's dying words are not cursing you out or crying as his plans are foiled, or any of that really stereotypical shit. Instead, he simply and quietly asks,
Remember us. Remember that we once lived.
And then comes the patches. You are harassed by the only remaining unsundered Ascian, Elidibus, a character who first appeared 5 years ago. He takes the form of Erdbert and rallies the people to become warriors of light. You reveal that he isn't just any old Ascian, but instead also a primal. Okay, I gotta explain this too. Just listen, so primals are gods that are created from magical energy and faith. Sometimes people can become primals by taking the prayers and the magic into themselves. This happens to Ysael and Thoradin in Heavensward, and Yotsu in Stormblood. So when this happens to Elidibus, it's not just out of nowhere, it actually does kind of make sense within the lore. Either way, Elidibus is a primal that was made to act as the head of their crystal guard to explain his will, but it also made him slowly lose his memory. Unlike Emet-Selch, whose memory was so detailed he made an entire city, Elidibus is driven by a supernatural desire, not a real history, in part because he was a child when he was made into a primal, and hasn't really aged since.
I am Elidibus, and it is my duty to steer mankind and the very star upon their true course. This I swore to someone. We spoke, and I swore. What? What did I...
So, Elidibus is angry because he's really just a petulant child who's losing the game. He taunts you in the ruins of Amarat, in the most boring instance of the entire game. But either way, you get some fancy crystals with memories in them afterwards, which is kind of neat. Afterwards, you find out he's been using the hope and belief in the Warriors of Light that he helped create to power himself as a primal. You fight your way through a dungeon full of Warriors of Light who are summoned from across time and space, and then face Elidibus, who has transformed himself fully into the Warrior of Light. At this point, it was nearly 1 o'clock in the morning when I did it on a work day, but I had to know what happened next, so I fought him. Real life responsibilities be damned. I mean, you know, it's a pretty fun fight. It's got some cool mechanics and the bopping track that's a remix of the Emet-Selch fight music. Halfway through the fight, the crystals you picked up summon the figure of an ancient Ascian to help you. Wait, that snap, that slumped walk, the sassy wave, Emet! Okay, when this happened, I actually did fucking scream, but like, I didn't record everything I did back then, so I don't have the footage, but just trust me, it was a great moment. And to think, not long before I hated the Ascians, and here, a small cameo made me fucking come. Either way, you defeat Elidibus and you're treated to this scene, slightly shortened for time.
This... Yes. I would become him. I would save everyone. This, I believed. Yet still they cried out in rage and despair. Divided over the fate of the star. A rare occurrence, always fleeting. But not this time. Not this time. Reconciliation. Elidibus. I was needed. I withdrew myself from Zodiark. For them. My people. My brothers. My friends. Stay strong. Keep the faith. At duty's end, we will meet again. We will. We will. The rains have ceased.
and we have been graced with another beautiful day. But you are not here to see it.
And I fucking cried. And, you know, I'm sure it had something to do with how late it was. You know, I was exhausted physically and mentally from the stress that 2020 has brought everybody. Elidibus was left alone in the world when Emet-Selch died, the last fleeting memory of ages past with nobody alive to share his burden with. All he wanted to do was save the world, to save his friends, to see them smile once again, even as the memories of those smiles faded. His last remaining connection to the past, Emet-Selch, put in place a plan that, should he die, he would ensure Elidibus would not have to bear this burden alone. Beyond all the metaphysical bullshit that brought us to this point, at that moment the sadness of the story was just palpable. So, why does this work? So, the pacing of MMOs are all garbage. Okay, I can't say all, but Final Fantasy XIV certainly is. All the interesting story quests are broken up by hours and hours of fetch quests and collecting bare asses. You know how I skip between Emet-Selch shooting the XX straight to Amarat? Well, in the game, first you have to go back to the Crystal Tower, take a nap, go clean a fish, ride the fish, do some fetch quests for different fish people, find the city, do some fetch quests for people who do not exist because Emet-Selch made them up with magic, and then you get the climactic scenes. Oh, and if you didn't do a specific side quest, then the game literally stops you in your tracks until you go back and do at least one of these series of side quests that by itself might take a few hours. All of this, I'll remind you, while you are literally dying in the story. If you came into the game at this expansion, you'd probably be really confused about all of the padding, or pissed, or have just given up on it, and honestly, I don't think I would blame you. The story is also completely flooded with traditional Final Fantasy fluffery. Did you see how many times I had to stop to explain metaphysical shit about crystals and magic and alternate worlds and gods and yada yada? And this was me trying to cut it down as much as possible for time. It's convoluted as hell, and honestly basically impenetrable. Even now, when I am so thoroughly emotionally invested in the story, whenever characters start to talk about it, my eyes glaze over. Somehow, despite all of these obvious flaws, the game still succeeds at being not only good, but honestly great. So what the fuck? Well, it seems like Reddit might actually hold the answers for once. When perusing the Final Fantasy XIV subreddit as I occasionally do to harvest memes, I found this post. Someone who rushed through the story all the way to the death of Elidibus felt a little bit lost. The emotional impact he heard about fell flat, and while he thought some parts were interesting, it didn't really elicit any emotions in him. What was more interesting was this reply from Reddit user Realistic Difficulty. For the amount of time we've been invested, this was a long time coming, and two cemented characters we've all got to know. It's like watching a sad movie on 5 times speed. You've got all the info, but it all happens so fast you don't process or become acquainted with it, because it all changes again. A 2017 article called Mythology Construction Virtual Worlds of Video Games by Ekaterina Galanina and Alexey Salin talk about the construction of mythology in video games. Specifically, it uses the Assassin's Creed series as an example of how playing over time in a world with a set mythology, where the player interacts in the creation and the sustainment of said mythology. The player becomes not just a receiver and a reader of the mythological narrative, but an active participant of it through visual addressing via performative techniques. By actively participating in the Assassin's Creed game throughout the years, you are slowly built to accept the mythology as an intrinsic element to the world. So much so that when you learn the French Revolution was just another aspect of the Templar-Assassin War, it makes sense within the context of the mythology that the player has become accustomed to. We can see similar things happening in a single long-running game. I've been playing Final Fantasy XIV for 4 years now, so a lot of the mythology of the world is just ingrained into me. I don't think the lore is particularly very, good? It's really convoluted and aggressively Final Fantasy, but that doesn't really matter because it's been ingrained into me. The Ascians have plagued my playthrough of Final Fantasy XIV for years. I hated them. I dreaded them because they would come and ruin perfectly good storylines with their fantasy bullshit. They were just bad, genetically evil in that classic JRPG way and literally worship a dark and evil god. I was sure we were only a few patches away from defeating them with the power of friendship. For years, this mythology existed of them, a mythology I participated in, where every event was caused by their evil machinations. I hated it, but I expected it. It was simply a part of the world, as immutable and unchangeable as a Mog station charging too much for mounts. What the fuck? Then comes Shadowbringers, and now there's a backstory, a reason. Look, I'm not about to sit here and tell you the Ascians were justified. Obviously they weren't, but they had a reason that was personal and emotional, and one that shattered my preconceived notions of who and what they were. The twist worked better because my feelings on them were so ingrained. If I'd only met them a few months prior and powered through the story, the twist still might have worked on some level, but it would not have been so powerful because my feelings would not have met the moment. Like, if Captain America in the Marvel movies picked up Thor's hammer in Avengers 1 and not in Endgame, it still would have been a cool moment, but the impact would not have been as strong. None of this is to say that if someone starts a game right now, they won't enjoy it or the story won't be meaningful. There's still plenty in the story that is honestly damn good without this mythologizing element. Like, the strange relationship between Thancred and Reen is honestly incredibly sweet, or becomes sweet. The way he pushes her away due to her similarities with his Minfilia, one of his best friends before his death, is really hard to watch for how realistic it feels. And the adoration the Crystal Exarch gives you because of the kindness you did to him in the past is really just incredibly cute. Just look at this adorable cat boy, don't you want to hug him? But it has this melancholy aspect hanging over it, where he's torn between his desire to adventure with you, his hero from another time, and his responsibility to the Crystarium. It's a little heartbreaking. The role of the Ascians in the story is similar in that it does work on its own. The world of the first is a reflection of their original plight, the despair, the hopelessness. As you explore the world and the character experiences the pain of the end, we implicitly understand the pain of the Ascians, their loss and their plight. But the most impactful aspect of their story is really their loneliness. Only 3 Ascians have lived since the Sundering. Everyone else they've elevated as shadows of their former selves with no memories or feelings towards the land they've lost. It's lonely being at the top, suffering a pain so few can understand. Emet-Selch seemed to understand the futility of his goals, that they were impossible. He implies that he spent many years living with people to try and convince himself that they were worth saving so that he could lay down his burden. Nobody could live up to the friends he left behind. And as much as he wants you to carry on their memory, the memory of his friends still haunt him, a specter he could never escape. And then there's Elidibus, a child given a task, ripped away from his family in a role he could hardly comprehend. He acts aloof and mysterious, but underneath his white guise, he was a child that his fellows hoped could save them. He says he was the first warrior of light because he was the first one to save the world through his connection with Zodiac, but he failed in the end and was left with a few friends he could relate to, and only wisps of memories. He was consumed by his goal, a goal he could barely understand as his remaining connection to the past fell around him. It's no wonder he gets so personal after Emet-Selch died, and no wonder Emet-Selch helped relieve him of his burden. Emet-Selch, so consumed by his loneliness, would not allow Elidibus to suffer that same fate into perpetuity. To know that behind this facade of darkness was loneliness. Behind the schemes was a simple desire to be home, to be with the ones they loved. It turned out that the beings I had mythologized as generic, evil, and boring were sympathetic the whole time, that these years of them vexing me had a purpose. There was meaning, and perhaps suffering behind those masks. They aren't justified in the story, and their role prior to Shadowbringers was still kind of weak, but it somehow works. The time spent building up the image of who they were made it all the more dramatic when that image was shattered.
Remember that we once lived.
So in the tradition of being a Debbie Downer about everything, including all the things that I love, there is a problem here. People coming into the game later and later won't feel the same emotional impact as the story continues. Beyond that one Redditor I mentioned, I've watched a few small Twitch streamers who play through the game get burnt out, and that the impact of the ending of Shadowbringers was weakened for them. Even though Square said to trim some of the fat from the earlier quests, it's still a massive game, with so much content that's a daunting task. Of course someone doing it one after another is going to feel like they're watching a drama and fast forward. This isn't a unique problem to Final Fantasy XIV, as other genres have different types of backlog fatigue. Comic books is an excellent example where there's so much backstory of any one character that's a labyrinthine and feels like a monumental task to even get into. But Final Fantasy XIV being a video game has its own unique flavor. When you read a comic book or a book, you're not really rushing to finish. You read it and experience it on your own time. In a video game, especially an MMO, there's always a rush to complete it. Final Fantasy XIV is an MMO. It has endgame content. Content specifically made to be enjoyed while you're at the highest level of the game, and it can only be experienced in its truest form in the short window when it's new before you outlevel it. These include the most challenging and intricate fights in the entire game. If you wait and don't level up, you can still fight these fights, but the experience of doing it at level is lost. This gives players an incentive, a powerful incentive, to rush through the main story as fast as possible. Sure, maybe they'll watch some of the cutscenes, but they won't stop and give them room to breathe, as one would if they had played the story when it was drip-fed through them. The FOMO here is incredibly strong, and it's only going to get stronger with each expansion. Whenever the next expansion comes out, most likely it will require knowledge of the rest of the game to fully enjoy, a game that already has 3 expansions worth of content. Players who start now might rush through and burn themselves out, or have the emotional moments fall flat, or maybe they'll buy a story skip and have no fucking idea what's going on. But no matter what they do, there's no substitute for experiencing the game as it came out. This is not to say the story of Shadowbringers or whatever the next expansion will be bad if you started later. Shadowbringers is still good on its own right, but if somebody told me they just started the game recently and that Shadowbringers did not speak to them, I couldn't really argue with that. Paradoxically, Shadowbringers' biggest asset, leveraging the nostalgia and the mythology of years and years of story to make an impactful statement, is also its largest weak point. As they say, it's the journey that matters, not the destination. So I hope nobody watches this video and I think they shouldn't play Final Fantasy XIV. Everybody should play Final Fantasy XIV because it's still a great game and the story is still good. This video is just me trying to explore my strong emotional reaction to the game and conceptualize it with other people's weaker reactions to it, and to try and think about how the very structure of the game incentivizes these two disparate feelings. But I mean, if you started the game last month and beat it today and Elizabeth still made you cry, I think you're valid, and I mean, you're still a big fucking crybaby, but you're in good company. And if you like this video, you should give this video a like, maybe leave a comment, maybe subscribe. For a little YouTuber like myself, your likes are exponentially more valuable to me than to a larger YouTuber, so you should give them all to me instead. And I will smile at all of them, and the good feelings will flow to you through the internet and make your day brighter too. And yeah, that is the video. Bye!